The rain hadn't stopped all night. It fell hard against the rooftops, like it was trying to wash something away. But what happened inside that house would leave a stain no storm could clean. He had waited years for this day, but not like this. Not with cuffs on his wrists and a girl screaming at the top of her lungs. Ava was only 7 years old when everything changed. That night, she was hiding in the closet, her small hands covering her ears, trying not to breathe too loud. Outside, the door, her mother screamed, glass shattered, and something heavy hit the wall. She wanted to help, but she was just a child. The only thing she could do was stay quiet. After what felt like forever, the front door slammed. Silence followed. Ava slowly came out of the closet. Her mother was lying on the floor, face swollen, nose bleeding. Ava dropped beside her and cried, "Mommy, get up." Her mother opened her eyes slightly. "It's okay, baby. He's gone now." But Ava knew he would come back. He always did. That man wasn't her real father. Her mom had met him when Ava was 4. At first, he seemed kind. He bought toys and smiled a lot, but as time went on, the kindness faded. What remained was cruel. He shouted for no reason, broke plates when dinner wasn't hot, and once made Ava stand outside in the cold because she spilled juice. And still, her mother stayed. "Because he helps pay the bills," she would say. "Because it's hard alone." Ava hated him. She wished he'd disappear. One day at school, Ava drew a picture for a class project. It was of a house on fire with a stick figure standing outside smiling. When the teacher asked her about it, she said, "That's my house, and I'm happy." Because the bad man is gone, the school counselor was called. Questions were asked, but Ava didn't know what to say. She was scared if she told. He'd hurt her mom worse. So she stayed silent. Years went by. Ava grew up. Her hair got longer, her voice stronger, but the fear stayed. By 13, she stopped hiding in closets. But every time she heard keys at the door, her body tensed. She tried to keep to herself at school, didn't make many friends. She wore hoodies, kept her head down. But inside, she was planning. She had started writing everything down. Every time he yelled, every time he hit something or someone, she wrote it in a notebook she hid under her mattress. It gave her power. Proof. A way to say, "I'm not crazy. This is real." Then came the day that changed everything. Her mom had promised to take her to the movies. Just the two of them. Ava was excited. She hadn't felt excited in a long time. But just as they were about to leave, he came home early. He saw them dressed, smiled coldly, and said, "Going somewhere?" Her mother stammered. "We were just," he interrupted. "You think you can run around without telling me?" His voice got louder. His face twisted. He grabbed a glass from the counter and threw it. It shattered against the wall. Ava stepped in front of her mom. "Stop it," she yelled. "Leave her alone." He turned toward her, his eyes burning. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Before he could move, the neighbor burst through the door. He had heard the yelling. "Back off!" The neighbor shouted. Police were called. Ava's heart pounded as officers cuffed the man and led him outside. Her mother cried, covering her face. Ava stood still. She walked to her room, pulled the notebook from under her bed, and gave it to the officers. "I've been writing this for 3 years," she said. "It's all in there." One officer opened it. Page after page of detailed entries. Dates, times, everything. He looked at her and said, "You're very brave." Ava didn't reply. She just watched as the man who had haunted her life was driven away in a police car. Asterisk, the silence after the police left was louder than all the screaming before it. The door was closed. The man was gone. But his shadow still hung in the corners of the house, like smoke that refused to clear. Ava sat at the kitchen table, staring at the broken glass on the floor. Her mother sat across from her, eyes red, face swollen, barely holding herself together. "I'm sorry," her mom whispered. "I didn't want you to see that." Ava didn't answer. She was tired of apologies, tired of pretending things would change when they never did. The police had promised to file charges. They said they had enough from her notebook to build a case. One officer even said he'd never seen a kid keep records that detailed. But Ava wasn't celebrating. She knew how things worked. She knew people like him had a way of slipping through cracks. "I need you to stay with your aunt for a while," her mother said suddenly. "What?" Ava blinked. "Why?" "Because it's safer, in case he gets out. I need to fix things here. Get the locks changed. Talk to a lawyer." Ava didn't argue. Part of her was relieved. She liked her Aunt May. Her house was warm and calm and smelled like cinnamon when she arrived. Her aunt hugged her tightly and didn't ask 1,000 questions. "You'll sleep better here," Aunt May said. And for the first time in a long time, Ava did, but nightmares didn't go away just because the room was quieter. Some nights she'd still wake up thinking she heard shouting. Other nights, she'd dream of standing in court, pointing her finger at him, but no sound would come out. Of her mouth. At school, things changed. Teachers looked at her differently. A few gave her quiet nods in the hallway. Others kept their distance. Her classmates whispered, "That's the girl from the news, right? The one who turned in her stepdad?" Ava kept her head down. But one day, during lunch, a girl named Janelle sat next to her. "You're not weird," Janelle said. "You're strong." Ava looked up, surprised. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," Janelle said. "I saw what you did." That's not something just anyone could do. It was the first time someone her age didn't look at her with pity or gossip in their voice. They started eating lunch together after that. Meanwhile, Ava kept going to therapy. Her counselor, Mrs. Garcia, was kind but didn't sugarcoat things. "Your fear won't disappear overnight," she said. "But every time you choose to live, even when it's hard, you're healing." Ava didn't fully understand that yet, but she kept showing up. Court dates started getting scheduled. The man pleaded not guilty. Her mother cried when she heard that. "Still won't admit what he did," she said. Even after everything, Ava said nothing. She didn't need him to admit anything. She had the truth and the notebook. The prosecutor asked Ava if she'd be willing to speak in court, not just hand over the notebook, but take the stand. Ava hesitated. "What if he looks at me?" she asked. "He will," the prosecutor said, "but you'll be safe. And your voice could make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Ava thought about that for days. She remembered every bruise on her mother's face, every time she hid in closets or flinched at loud noises. She remembered the first time she wrote in her notebook, hands shaking, heart racing. And she thought about all the kids who might be hiding in their rooms right now, too scared to speak. "I'll do it." She finally said, "I'll testify." The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with air conditioning. It was the kind of cold that made your skin feel tight and your chest heavy. Ava sat on the bench, her small hands balled into fists in her lap. She had waited for this moment. But now, sitting in front of strangers, facing the man who hurt her family, she wasn't sure if she could speak. The bailiff called her name. Ava stood up, legs trembling, and walked to the witness stand. She could feel his eyes on her. He sat just feet away, wearing a suit, looking calm. Too calm. She didn't look at him. She looked at the prosecutor. "Can you state your name for the court?" "Ava Monroe," she said, voice soft but steady. The questioning began. They asked about the notebook. She explained how she started writing everything down when she was 10, how she recorded the times he yelled, hit, slammed doors. He made "my mom cry almost every day," she said. And I used to hide in closets with my fingers in my ears. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. She told the court about the movie day, how excited she was, how it all turned dark when he came home. She told them how he threw the glass, how she stepped in front of her mother, how she handed the notebook to the police. When the prosecutor finished, the judge nodded. Then came the defense attorney. He stood slowly and walked toward her. You wrote all this in a notebook, correct? He asked. Yes. Isn't it true that sometimes children make things up when they're scared or angry? I didn't make anything up, Ava replied firmly. The lawyer raised his eyebrows. But how can we be sure? You're just a child. Maybe you misunderstood what you saw. Ava clenched her fists tighter. I know what fear looks like. I know what it feels like when you want to scream but can't. I didn't make anything up. I just wrote down the truth because no one else would. A pause filled the room. The judge looked over his glasses. The lawyer cleared his throat and stepped back. No further questions. Ava stepped down. As she walked back to her seat, she finally looked at the man. He didn't smile. He didn't speak, but she didn't care. She had said what needed to be said. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Her mother wrapped an arm around her, shielding her from the cameras. You were so brave, she whispered. Ava didn't feel brave. She felt tired, but deep inside, something had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. Later that week, her testimony made headlines. Teen takes stand against abuser with journal full of truth. Ava Monroe's courage shakes courtroom. Janelle showed her the articles on her phone. Girl, you're famous, she joked. Ava rolled her eyes. I don't want to be famous. I just want him to stay locked up. The trial lasted 3 more days. The jury took less than 4 hours to decide. Guilty. Her mother cried when the verdict was read. Ava stared ahead, hands steady in her lap. Judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. When he was led away in cuffs, he didn't look back, and Ava finally exhaled. Not because everything was better, but because it had started to heal. Not all battles end in courtrooms. Some begin there. The man was gone, sentenced, locked away. But Ava quickly learned that healing wasn't a switch you flipped. It was more like learning how to breathe again after being underwater too long. Ava returned home 2 days after the trial ended. The locks were changed. The broken glass had been cleaned up. The walls had been painted, but memories still clung to them. Her mother greeted her at the door with a long hug. I want us to start fresh, she whispered. Ava nodded. They tried. Really, they did. Her mom made pancakes in the mornings, just like she used to. They watched old cartoons on weekends. They even planted flowers in the backyard, but there were still moments when they both froze at the sound of loud footsteps. Or when someone slammed a door too hard. They were free, yes, but not untouched. At school, Ava was still that girl to most people. Some were kind. Others were just curious. One boy in class asked her, "Did you really help get your stepdad locked up?" She stared at him. Double quotes, no. He got himself locked up. He didn't ask again. Janelle stuck by her side. They walked to classes together, ate lunch in their usual spot, and sometimes just sat quietly without speaking. Janelle never pushed. That's what Ava appreciated most. But what helped the most was writing, not the kind she hid anymore. Real writing. Her English teacher had noticed something in her essays and suggested she join the school newspaper. Ava hesitated. Why would anyone care what I write? She asked. Her teacher smiled. Because words can make people see what they've been ignoring. Ava joined. Her first article was about community safety and how schools could support kids facing violence at home. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about her directly, but it came from a place of truth. The article spread fast. Other students started opening up. Teachers asked for copies. Even the principal called her in to say he was proud. You turned your pain into purpose, he told her. She didn't know what to say to that dot. All she knew was writing made the noise. In her head quieter. One day, she got an email from a girl in another school district. I read your article, it said. It helped me tell my counselor what's been happening at home. Ava stared at the screen for a long time. She replied, with 2 words, I'm proud. More messages followed over the weeks. Some were just thank yous. Some were heartbreaking stories. Ava created a folder in her inbox called Brave Voices. She read every message, saved every single one. Her mother noticed the change. You smile. More now, she said one evening over dinner. Ava shrugged. I think I feel lighter. You deserve that, her mom replied. They didn't talk much about the trial anymore, but there was one night, just before Ava's birthday, when her mom came into her room and sat beside her bed. I'm sorry I didn't leave sooner, she said. I was scared. I thought I was protecting you by staying. I see now I was wrong. Ava reached out and took her hand. We made it out, she said quietly. That's what matters. They sat there for a while, holding hands in the quiet, and for the first time in years, Ava felt truly safe in her own home. Some people think strength is loud, shouting in courtrooms, demanding justice. But Ava discovered strength could also be quiet, found in the way you keep going, found in every morning you get up, despite the pain still hiding behind your smile. Ava's school year moved on. She kept writing for the paper. Her words were now being reposted by local pages and school groups across the state. Students from different schools started sending her ideas. Can you write about bullying? One asked. Could you do something about foster kids? Another wrote. She didn't know how to respond at first. She wasn't sure if she could carry all those stories on her own. But she tried. Each article brought something new, a memory, a lesson, a spark of anger, or a small joy. Ava was no longer writing to be heard. She was writing so others could speak to. Then one day, her principal called her into the office. There's a nonprofit doing a youth leadership summit next month, he said. They want someone who's lived through real change, someone who speaks from experience. I think that's you. Ava stared at him. I've never done anything like that before. He nodded. That's exactly why it'll matter. She agreed. To go. At the summit, there were students from different cities, each with their own stories. Some talked about violence, others about poverty. One boy shared how his brother was wrongfully jailed. Ava listened closely. When it was her turn to speak, her heart pounded. But when she opened her mouth, the words came. I didn't know what courage was until I saw my mom try to smile through bruises, she said. I didn't feel brave when I gave the police my notebook. I was just tired of being scared. She told them about writing, about how her pain turned into something useful, how it helped others find their voices too. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a second, then applause filled the space. Later, a girl came up to her and said, You made me feel less alone. That sentence stayed with Ava for weeks. When she returned home, she couldn't stop thinking about how many kids still felt like they had no one. So she came up with a new idea. She pitched it to her school newspaper editor and principal. What if we set up an anonymous Dropbox? Somewhere students can leave letters, stories, or just thoughts. We don't need to know names. We just need to know what's going on. The principal was hesitant at first. What if it becomes a place for gossip or fake complaints? Ava replied, What if it becomes the one place someone finally tells the truth? After a week of discussion, they approved it. They called it the Silence Box. It was a small wooden container placed near the counselor's office. No names required, just words. Within days, it was full. Some notes were short. I'm scared at home. Others were long letters about family, depression, or bullying. Each one was passed to counselors privately. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Ava checked it every morning, carefully sorting each paper and delivering it safely. Soon, other schools in the district called to ask how they could start their own. She didn't expect any of it, but she was ready. It started as a box, just wood and paper. But soon it became something much bigger. The silence box wasn't just a place to drop notes. It became a mirror, showing what schools often missed and what students were too afraid to say out loud. The school counselor, Mrs. Hampton, was the first to notice the change. "We've always had students struggling," she said. "But now we know. Now they're telling us." One letter read, "My brother hits me when my mom's at work." Another, "I want help, but I'm scared to ask for it face to face." Mrs. Hampton started weekly check-ins for students who left. More than one note. Slowly, things started to shift. Ava didn't read the contents unless the writer asked for her help directly. But just sorting the papers, seeing the writing, it gave her chills. These weren't small things. These were heavy truths. She began making posters with information: who to talk to, where to go, how to stay safe. She placed them all around campus. The school board caught wind of it. One morning, the principal called her in again. "We're having a district meeting," he said. "They want to hear from you about the box, about how this all started." Ava was nervous. She had never spoken to a room full of adults in suits before, teachers and board members, people who ran the system. But she said yes. At the meeting, she walked to the front, carrying a folder with data: how many notes had come in, how many were acted on, and how the students were responding. "I was one of those kids," she began. "I lived in a house where fear was normal. No one saw it. Not because they didn't care, but because I didn't know how to say it out loud." She told them about the silence box. Not just how it worked, but why it mattered. "It doesn't fix everything," she said, "but it starts something." The room was quiet. Then one board member spoke up. "We need one in every school." Others nodded. Before the week ended, Ava received an email. Several middle and high schools in the district wanted help setting up their own versions. She wasn't sure how to do that, but she said yes anyway. She created a step-by-step guide: how to build the box, how to manage notes safely, how to link counselors without breaking trust. She called the guide Speak Safe. A student's voice program. Word spread quickly. She was invited to a youth development panel, then a community radio interview. Parents started sending messages thanking her. A few even apologized for not realizing what their kids were going through. One day, while Ava was updating a new silence box at a nearby school, a teacher pulled her aside. "You're not just helping kids," she said. "You're changing how we listen." That sentence hit Ava deeply. Back home, her mother printed out the articles written about her and placed them in a scrapbook. "You should remember what you did," she told her. Ava flipped through the pages, reading headlines: "Teen Survivor becomes voice for the silenced. One student's idea shakes the system." It felt strange to see herself described like that. She never wanted fame. She only wanted change. One night, while looking through her old notebook, the one that started it all, Ava noticed the very first line she had ever written: "Maybe if I write it down, someone will believe me." She smiled softly, because now they did. Some people think changing the world means leading marches or making speeches. But Ava learned that change could also come from a wooden box, quiet courage, and the simple act of being believed. It had been 6 months since the silence box began. By now, over 20 schools had adopted the idea. Ava was asked to speak at a youth conference hosted by a state education group. This time, the stage was bigger, the lights were brighter, and the audience? Hundreds of students, teachers, and leaders from all over. Her palms were sweaty as she stepped to the podium. She looked out at the faces, some curious, some tired, some waiting to be inspired. She took a breath. "I used to hide in closets," she said. "I thought being quiet kept me safe. But silence doesn't protect us. It just traps us." She told them her story, not the dramatic version, but the honest one. The version that included fear, hesitation, and writing when she couldn't speak. After the talk, a line of students waited to meet her. Some thanked her. Others just hugged her. One boy whispered, "You helped me stop blaming myself." Ava didn't know what to say to that. She simply nodded and held his hand for a second. On the way home, she sat in the back seat of her mother's car, staring out the window. "I never wanted any of this," she said. Her mom glanced at her through the mirror. "But you were meant for it." Ava wasn't sure what she believed about fate, but she knew something had shifted. At school, she started a support group called Brave Voices. It wasn't therapy, just a space where students could talk, cry, or sit in silence. The group met every Thursday in the art room. Teachers gave her permission. The counselor supported it. At first, only 3 students showed up. By the 3rd week, it was 15. They didn't always talk about deep things. Sometimes they shared poems. Other times they just painted or sat together. But it became a place of comfort. One afternoon, a girl named Sky told the group, "This is the only hour of my week I feel like I can breathe." Everyone went quiet, and one by one, they nodded. Ava wrote about it for the school paper. She called the article "The Hour That Heals." It was reposted across student forums and community blogs. She started receiving messages. Again, not just from students now, but teachers, counselors, even social workers. Her email filled up every day. One message stood out. It was from a school board member in another state. "I read your article. We'd like to fly you out to speak at our statewide educator conference." Ava stared at the screen for a long time. When she showed it to her mom gasped, "Do you want to go?" Ava nodded slowly. "I think I do." The trip was set for next month. She'd travel with her aunt, who agreed to be her guardian. For the trip. It felt like everything was moving fast, but Ava stayed grounded. She still helped collect notes from the silence box. She still attended every Brave Voices meeting. She still walked Janelle to class and helped kids find the right people to talk to, because while people were now calling her a youth advocate or a survivor leader, she still felt like just a girl who had once been scared and decided to write it all down. Airports had always made Ava nervous, not because of flying, but because of the waiting. Waiting always reminded her of hiding, of silence. But this time, the plane wasn't an escape. It was a mission. She wasn't running away from anything. She was going to speak for someone who COULDN single quotes T. Ava and her aunt landed in Denver just after noon. Snow lined the sidewalks, and the air felt sharper than what Ava was used to. But she liked it. It made everything feel fresh, like a clean page waiting to be written on. The hotel room was quiet and neat. Her aunt unpacked while Ava reviewed her notes for the conference. Her speech wasn't long, just 5 minutes. But every word mattered. The next day, they arrived at the convention center early. The room was big. Rows of chairs stretched across the floor. Lights beamed from the stage. It felt serious, official. A volunteer handed Ava a pass with her name printed in bold letters. Guest speaker, Ava Monroe. Taqnix took a breath. She had done this before, but it still felt like the first time. Backstage, a woman from the education board greeted her. "We've read all your work," she said. "You've helped us realize how much we weren't listening." Ava nodded, not sure what to say. Soon, it was her turn. She walked onto the stage, heart pounding. She looked out and saw teachers, principals, counselors, and school board members. And then she began. I was 12 the first time I wrote about fear, she said. Not in a paper for school. In a notebook under my bed. She shared her story. But she focused more on what came after, the silence box, the messages from students, the brave voices meetings. It doesn't take much to let someone speak, she said. Just space, safety, and someone who listens. When she finished, the room clapped. Not a fast, noisy clap, a deep, quiet one. Like people were still thinking. Afterward, educators came up to her. Some thanked her. Some asked how they could start similar programs. One woman said, I've been a counselor for 20 years. You reminded me why I started. Back at the hotel, Ava sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her aunt sat beside her and handed her a cup of tea. You did good, she said softly. I feel like I can finally breathe, Ava whispered. That night, she couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not for the paper, not for school. Just for herself. She wrote, somewhere out there, a kid is hiding in a closet like I used to. I hope one day they write their story too. And when they do, I hope someone listens. When she got back from Denver, Ava felt different. Not in a big, obvious way, but inside, something had shifted. Like she had crossed a line between being a survivor and becoming someone others looked up to. School welcomed her back with posters and a short mention during morning announcements. But Ava didn't want a spotlight. She just wanted her work to matter. The Brave Voices group kept growing. Now they had over 20 students, and even a few teachers would stop by just to listen. They painted murals together, wrote poems, created mini-campaigns on kindness, safety, and speaking up. Ava smiled more now. She still had tough days, but they didn't own her. One Thursday, a boy named Ethan showed up to Brave Voices for the first time. He didn't speak for 2 meetings. Just listened. Then, one afternoon, after the others had left, he stayed behind. My dad's in jail, he sighed quietly. Everyone thinks I should be okay about it. Ava didn't speak. She waited. He hurt my mom, Ethan continued. I'm not sad he's gone. I'm just tired of pretending it didn't happen. Ava nodded. You don't have to pretend. Here. From that day on, Ethan showed up early every week. He started drawing again, sketches of forests, stars, and peaceful places. Ava knew what that meant. Art wasn't just a hobby. It was a way through. At the next school board meeting, Ava presented a proposal. I want to launch a district-wide art and writing contest, she said. The theme is simple. Speak your truth. The idea was to let students express their feelings without fear of judgment. The board approved it. Within 2 weeks. Submissions poured in from every school in the district. Paintings, short stories, spoken word videos, songs, all filled with pain, strength, and hope. Ava read every single one. Some made her cry. Some made her feel proud. One entry came from a student who used to bully others. It read, I didn't understand my own anger until I realized it came from a house full of shouting. I'm trying to change. Ava posted that one on the school's main bulletin board. When the winners were announced, Ava didn't focus on trophies or rankings. She hosted a gallery night instead, a space for students and families to come see the art, hear the words, and understand what kids were really carrying. The room was filled. Parents wept. Teachers listened. And Ava stood quietly in the back, watching it all unfold. Janelle nudged her. You started something. Ava smiled. We all did. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the last paintings were taken down, Ava stayed behind. She stood in front of one drawing, Ethan's sketch of a house with stars above it. At the bottom, he had written, This is what I want my future to feel like. Ava touched the frame. She understood that feeling 2***. Some people thought Ava was just lucky, that she had simply been in the right place at the right time. But luck doesn't build trust. It doesn't create movements. Ava's strength came from showing up every day, even when no one noticed. Months passed. Ava's school received a certificate from the state's Department of Education, praising their student-led initiatives for mental health and safety. The principal proudly showed it during assembly. But Ava barely noticed the praise. Her attention was on the students. The messages in the silence. Box had changed. Fewer cries for help. More reflections. More healing. One letter said, "I stood up to my uncle this weekend. I told him to leave. I've never done that before." Another read, "My mom is finally in therapy. I think she smiled yesterday." These words meant more to Ava than any award. Meanwhile, Ava was invited to help train teachers. The district planned a new workshop series designed to help staff spot signs of abuse or neglect. The team asked Ava to co-lead one of the sessions. At first, she hesitated. "I'm not an expert," she told them. "You're the reason we're here?" They replied, "So she did it." The training room was filled with adults, some skeptical, some tired. Ava stood at the front and opened with a story. "I once had a teacher who asked why I was always late to class. I wanted to tell her I'd been crying all night. But instead, I said my alarm didn't go off." She paused. She accepted that answer because she didn't know what else to say. I don't blame her. But I wonder how different things could have been if she had known how to ask the right questions. By the end of the session, 3 teachers approached her privately. One said, "I think I missed signs in a student last year. I won't miss them again." Back at school, Ava noticed something else. More teachers were making time to talk. They stayed after class, asked questions differently, walked slower through the halls. The atmosphere was changing. It wasn't just about the box anymore. It was about culture. Brave Voices meetings had to move to a larger classroom. New students joined every month. Some days, Ava didn't even lead. Others stepped in. They made posters together with quotes like, "Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up. We heal by listening, not by fixing." One Thursday, Ava showed up to the meeting to find everyone already gathered in a circle. Janelle stood in the center with a small cake. "We made something for you," she said, smiling. On the cake was a simple message: "Thank you for speaking." First, Ava's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do this alone," she said quietly. "But you were the first," someone replied. That night, as she walked home, Ava held the empty cake box and looked at the stars. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one hiding in the dark, and she whispered, "We made it." The story could have ended there. Courtroom victory, healing groups, school awards. But Ava's journey was never about ending. It was about what came next. Because healing isn't a final chapter. It's a life that keeps unfolding. Spring brought warm air and open windows at school. Ava sat by the window in English class, watching cherry blossoms fall outside. Her teacher announced a final project, a short memoir. Most students groaned. But Ava just smiled. This time, she knew exactly what she wanted to write. She titled it "The Notebook That Spoke." Her classmates had heard bits of her story before, but the memoir gave them the full picture: the fear, the silence, the day she handed the notebook to the police, and everything that followed. When she read it aloud in class, the room went quiet. One girl cried. Another boy walked up to her after and said, "My sister's going through something like that. I didn't know how to help. Now I do." The teacher gave her an A and shared it with the district newsletter. It went viral again. A popular youth advocacy website picked it up. They titled the repost, "Teen Turns Pain into a Roadmap for Change." Soon, her email was full again. Invites, podcast requests, panel offers. Ava didn't say yes to everything. She chose carefully. She didn't want to become a spokesperson. She wanted to stay grounded in what mattered, the students. Meanwhile, Ethan's drawings were now being used for posters in other schools. One had his art of a peaceful tree with the words, "Speak, even if your voice shakes." He smiled when he saw it in the counselor's office. "I never thought my sketch would leave this room," he said. "You never know what your truth will do." Ava replied, Then came the biggest news yet. A publisher reached out. They had seen her memoir. They wanted to offer her a deal, not just to expand it, but to turn her journey into a full book for young readers. Ava froze when she read the email. A book? She showed her mom. Her mother read the message 3 times before whispering, "They want your story to help even more kids." They both cried. It wasn't about fame. It was about hope. Ava said yes. Writing her book didn't feel like sharing. It felt like revisiting every step she had taken. Every tear, every shaky moment in court, every word in that notebook. But Ava didn't shy away. She knew if her story could help even one more person, it would be worth it. She started working on the book. After school and on weekends, her publisher paired her with an editor who specialized in youth voices. They didn't try to change her. Words, they helped her shape them, polish them, and make each page stronger. The hardest chapter to write was the beginning, the night of the glass-shattering argument. The moment Ava stepped in front of her mother, the silence that followed. She wrote it slowly, one sentence at a time. Sometimes she had to stop and breathe. Sometimes she cried. But she kept writing. Her editor encouraged her. Every line you write can be the light someone else needs, she said. Ava also included chapters about the silence box, the Brave Voices group, and the contests. She told the full story, not just the pain, but the growth. She added stories from other students too, with their permission. Not their names, but their voices. By summer, the manuscript was done, the title, "The Truth in the Silence." The publisher loved it. They prepared the release for fall, just in time for National Bullying Prevention Month. Ava's school planned a special assembly to announce the news. Students cheered. Teachers clapped. One teacher even said, "We knew you'd do something big, Ava, but this is more than big. It's needed." Ava thanked them, but her mind was on something else. Would the book actually help? Would it reach the ones still afraid to speak? The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 weeks later, she got a message from a middle school teacher in another state. "We read the first chapter as a class," it said. 3 students asked to speak to a counselor afterward. One said she didn't know it was okay to tell. Ava closed her eyes and smiled. This was why she wrote it. This was the reason. She kept going. The world didn't change all at once, but it did shift little by little. With each reader, each message, each shared story, Ava's voice traveled further than she ever dreamed. And for the first time, she began to believe she wasn't just telling a story. She was building something bigger. As fall arrived, Ava's book officially launched. She held the first printed copy in her hands, feeling the weight of it. Her words, her story, now living on paper. Her mom stood beside her, wiping a tear. "You gave people something they'll never forget." Ava didn't have words. She just hugged her mom tightly. Soon after, bookstores reached out to schedule signings. Libraries invited her for readings. Even news outlets began asking for interviews. But Ava set a limit. She didn't want to become a celebrity. She wanted to stay a student, stay involved. So she said yes to a few key events and no to anything that felt too big or distracting. Her favorite event was one hosted at a local library. The room wasn't huge, maybe 30 people, but they all listened closely as she read from chapter 6, the moment she first dropped the silence box note into the wooden slot. When she finished, a small girl raised her hand. "Do you think I can write a book too?" she asked. Ava smiled gently. "You don't have to wait," she said. "Start with one sentence. That's all it takes." The girl beamed. Back at school, things stayed grounded. She still attended Brave Voices meetings, still answered emails, still walked to class with Janelle. And then, one cold afternoon, something unexpected happened. The governor's office called. A staff member explained that Ava had been nominated for a statewide Youth Leadership Award. Ava was stunned. "There are so many others who do more," she said. "Maybe," the staffer replied. "But your impact started a chain reaction across the entire state. That matters." Ava accepted the nomination quietly. The ceremony was planned for December, just before winter break. Her mom bought her a simple navy dress. Janelle helped her rehearse her speech. The day of the event, Ava stood on stage in front of hundreds of people. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm not here because I'm special," she said. "I'm here because I finally believed that silence wasn't the only way to survive. And once I spoke, others did too." The audience stood. Applause filled the room. She was awarded a medal. But what meant more was what happened after. One of the judges approached her and said, "I'm going to ask every school in my district to start a silence box." Ava smiled and nodded. Change didn't come in waves. It came in whispers that built into movement. And Ava was right in the center, not by choice, but by purpose. Asterisk, some people chase the spotlight. Others are pulled into it by truth. Ava never wanted attention. She wanted understanding. But the more she shared her truth, the more people listened. And in that listening, something powerful began to grow, a movement rooted in empathy. Winter settled in, and snow started covering the sidewalks of Ava's neighborhood. But inside the schools, something else was spreading. Silence boxes were now active in over 50 schools across the state. District leaders reached out to Ava for advice. She was asked to join an advisory panel for youth safety programs. Each meeting took place over video call. Ava sat at her desk in her bedroom, wearing a headset, surrounded by her usual notebooks and drawings from Brave Voices students. Even when professionals spoke with big words and long reports, Ava brought it back to one simple point. Listen to what students are actually saying. Not just the words, but what's underneath. They listened. They even asked her to help draft a new statewide guide for schools, a toolkit for student-led safety and healing. Her name appeared on the cover as a co-author. When the printed guide arrived at her school, the principal held it up in the hallway and said, "History just walked past locker 312. Ava laughed, a little embarrassed, but deep down, it meant something. That guide would now be shared with every school in the state. Later that week, during Brave Voices, a new student joined. His name was Diego. He was quiet, wore headphones a lot, and usually kept to himself. But during one meeting, Ava asked if anyone wanted to share something they had written. To her surprise, Diego raised his hand. He read a poem about pretending to smile while drowning inside. When he finished, the room was silent, and someone whispered, "That's exactly how I feel sometimes." Diego looked up, shocked. That moment reminded Ava why she kept the group going. Not for numbers or reports, but for these quiet breakthroughs. By mid-December, a national magazine reached out. They wanted to do a feature on youth activists changing. America. Ava was on the SHORTLIST. At first, she hesitated. Big interviews made her nervous. But after talking with her mom, she agreed. The article came out just after New Year's. The headline read, "The girl who taught schools how to listen It included photos of Ava with the silence box, brave voices, members, and her book. The article ended with a quote from Ava. "We don't need perfect systems. We need people who care enough to see the invisible." Her story began to spread beyond schools. Community groups, nonprofits, and national youth coalitions started using her model. One group even named their new center after her book. The Truth in the Silence resource hub. Ava didn't talk about it much. She stayed focused, still writing, still meeting students, still being the girl who once passed her notebook to a police officer and chose to speak. Even as the world praised her, Ava never stopped seeing herself as the quiet girl who once feared speaking out. But that was her power. She hadn't forgotten the pain. She had turned it into purpose, and others followed because they saw she never left them behind. By early spring, the Brave Voices group had grown so large, it needed an auditorium. What started as 5 kids in the art room had now become a weekly gathering of over 50 students, with volunteers and rotating speakers. Each meeting followed a rhythm. They'd open with a reflection or a quote. Then students would share. Sometimes art, sometimes writing, sometimes silence. But even silence was allowed. Because in that space, silence didn't mean fear. It meant being held. Ava didn't lead every week anymore. She encouraged others to take turns guiding sessions. One week, a girl named Liana shared her story of living in a shelter after her mom fled an abusive home. Another time, Ethan created a mural live during the meeting, a wall of color showing sadness melting into hope. These moments made the group feel like more than just a meeting. It was a movement. One Thursday, Ava brought in a special guest, Mrs. Davis, the officer who had taken her statement years ago. Mrs. Davis stood at the front and said, "I still remember the day Ava handed me that notebook. It wasn't just evidence. It was courage." She talked about how that day changed, how she handled every case afterward. After the meeting, several students waited to speak with her. One boy said, "You're the first cop I've ever felt safe around." Mrs. Davis nodded, her voice soft. "You all deserve safety." Later that month, Ava received a letter in the mail. It was from a senator's office. They had heard about the silence box and Brave Voices, and they wanted Ava to speak before a subcommittee about youth-led school safety programs. This wasn't just a speech in a gym or a community center. It was Washington. DCAVA read the letter 3 times. She wasn't sure she was ready for something. That big. Her mom hugged her and said, "If you're scared, that means it matters." Ava took a deep breath, then nodded. She would go. Asterisk. The city looked different from the back seat of a cab. Bigger, colder. But Ava wasn't here to be amazed by buildings or feel small in a crowd. She came with a message, carried from the hearts of 1,000 unheard kids. And this time, people in power would listen. Washington, D.C. felt nothing like home. The buildings were taller, the air sharper, the sidewalks filled with important people in suits, all rushing somewhere. Ava arrived with her mom and Mrs. Davis, who had volunteered to escort her as a safety advocate. Her speech would be part of a hearing on youth safety and mental health. She would sit beside professionals, researchers, and a senator's education advisor. At the hotel, Ava sat quietly at the desk, going over her notes. She had written and rewritten the speech 3 times. What mattered most, too, her wasn't sounding impressive. It was making sure the kids she spoke for could feel their stories through her voice. The next morning, they entered the Capitol building. Security checks, long halls, polished floors. Everything felt official and heavy. Ava was given a nameplate and a glass of water. She sat at the long table, heart pounding. The room filled slowly. Politicians, staffers, a few reporters. And then it began. Each speaker had 5 minutes. Some read from long documents filled with data. Ava listened carefully, hands folded. When it was her turn, the chairperson said, "We now invite Ava Monroe, student advocate from your state and founder of Brave Voices." She stood, smoothed her notes, and began. "I'm here today because silence nearly broke me," she said, "but writing saved me." And because of that, other students found the courage to speak too. She spoke about the notebook, the silence box, the poems, drawings, and small acts of bravery that filled her school and others. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But her words landed like stones in a quiet pond. The room listened. When she finished, one committee member said, "Miss Monroe, you reminded us that policy starts with people. Thank you." Outside the room, cameras waited. A journalist asked, "What made you so brave at such a young age?" Ava paused. "I wasn't brave. I was tired of being scared." Her answer was quoted across multiple news outlets the next day. She didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was what happened after. Two senators approached her and asked for a copy of her speech. Another aide asked if she'd be willing to join a youth advisory board. Ava smiled. "I'll need to check my class schedule." Asterisk, some kids dream of fame. Ava never did. She dreamed of a world where kids didn't have to be brave just to be safe. But now her voice was echoing in places she never thought she'd stand, and people who once ignored voices like hers were finally paying attention. After Washington, everything moved quickly. The hearing went viral on social media. A short clip of Ava saying, "I wasn't brave, I was tired of being scared," was shared millions of times. Her inbox flooded. Some messages came from students. Others came from teachers, therapists, youth shelters, even police departments. National Youth Magazine called her one of the top 10 most influential teens of the year. Her school held a celebration in the gym. Students cheered. The principal gave a short speech. But Ava asked not to speak that day. She stood quietly, holding her award plaque, then walked back to class. "I don't want to be the face of something," she told her mom that evening. "I want to be part of the work." Her mom smiled. "That's why they trust you." Meanwhile, Brave Voices had spread across the state. Other schools started their own chapters. Ava helped create a starter guide. It included how to hold space for others, how to create anonymous sharing tools, what to do if someone shares something dangerous. It wasn't about making rules. It was about giving students the tools to build trust. Ava didn't lead every group anymore. She became a connector, helping others start, offering support, and quietly stepping back when they were ready to lead themselves. One weekend, she visited a school in a small town where a Brave Voices group had started. There were only 6 members, all middle schoolers, but they had posters, a silence box, and even a small library of journals. One girl showed Ava a poem she had written. It read, "I'm not the storm you think I am. I'm the quiet after." Ava teared up. She knelt beside the girl and whispered, "Your words will reach someone who needs them. Just keep writing." Later, Ava walked through the school's hallway and noticed a bulletin board titled Brave, Things We've Done. One note read, "Told my dad I wanted him to go to therapy." Another said, "Asked for help." And another simply said, "Wrote it down." Ava stood there for a long time. This was it. This was why every scary step had mattered. Asterisk movements don't need loud leaders. They need steady ones. Ava didn't yell. She listened. She didn't rush. She stayed. And because of that, students from across the country started believing that their silence didn't have to be forever. It was late April when Ava received a letter from a school she had never heard of. It came in a yellow envelope with a hand drawn bird on the corner. Inside was a packet, dozens of letters written by 7th graders from Oregon. Each one told a small story. One girl wrote, I saw your video and gave my own notebook to my counselor. Another student said, our school has a Brave Voices circle now. I used to think I was weak for crying. Now I know its strength. Ava read each one carefully. She laid them out on her bedroom floor like puzzle pieces. Her mom peeked in. These are your answers, she said gently. To all the nights you cried wondering if it mattered. Ava saved the letters in a box. She labeled proof. At school, the atmosphere continued to evolve. Teachers now had a quiet check-in system. If a student needed space, they could flip a small card on their desk to red, yellow, or green. Red meant, I'm struggling. Yellow meant, I'm unsure. Green meant, I'm okay. It started in one classroom. Within weeks, it spread to every grade. Students felt seen without having to say a word. Ava didn't invent the system, but she had inspired the shift that allowed it to happen. Then, something unexpected happened. An independent film director reached out. He had read Ava's book and wanted to turn it into a short film. It's not for profit, he said. It's for education, something schools can show, something that starts conversation. Ava was hesitant. I'm not an actor, she said. You don't have to be, he replied. You already lived it. She agreed, as long as it focused on truth and healing, not just drama. Filming took place that summer. It felt strange watching someone play a version of herself, walking down school halls, writing in a notebook, standing in court. But Ava stayed involved in every step. She worked with the writers to make sure no part of the story was exaggerated or sensationalized. This isn't about entertainment, she said. It's about understanding. When the film was finished, it was shown at a small youth film festival. People cried, people clapped, but most importantly, people asked, how do we bring this to our school? When the lights dimmed at the end of the screening, Ava didn't look around to see who clapped. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled writing a note no one was supposed to read. Now they were part of something that touched thousands. After the short film's release, schools began requesting copies to show during assemblies. The team made it available free online for educators. Soon, Ava started receiving messages from guidance counselors. Your film opened. Conversations we didn't know how to start. A student came to me right after the screening. She had never shared before. Each note reinforced something Ava already believed. Storytelling was more than just words. It was a bridge. Over the summer, Ava was invited to a national youth mental health summit. It was her first time flying alone. She packed her journal, her speech, and the small yellow envelope from Oregon. A summit brought together students, advocates, doctors, and educators from every state. Ava's session was called Youth-Led Change. That last. She stood in front of a packed room and opened with a simple line. I never wanted to lead. I wanted someone to hear me. And when no one did, I wrote it down. She talked about small ideas becoming movements. The silence box, brave voices, the green, yellow, red cards. Afterward, students came up to her one by one. A girl from New Mexico said, we're starting a truth wall in our cafeteria because of your book. A boy from Maine showed her a bracelet he wore. I made this the day I told my truth. I don't take it off. Ava carried those stories with her like patches sewn into her backpack. When she returned home, the school year was already starting again. She was now a senior. Everything felt different, but also the same. Janelle was co-president of Brave Voices. Now. Ethan had started teaching younger students how to express emotions through art. And Ava? She focused on making sure others felt strong enough to carry the torch without her. She started putting together a guidebook titled Starting Brave Spaces. It included checklists, activity ideas, conversation starters, and letters from students. She printed 10 copies at first. But after a few teachers saw it, they asked for more. Within weeks, it was requested in 5 different states. Ava updated it, polished the pages, and published it online, free for anyone to download. She didn't need credit. She just wanted it to reach the ones still waiting for a safe place. Asterisk senior year didn't feel like an ending. It felt like planting season. Ava had spent years digging through hard soil, pulling up pain, planting honesty. Now, the roots were growing without her watering every day. The movement had a life of its own. As the fall semester picked up, Ava found herself with less free time. College applications, scholarship forms, study sessions. She stayed grounded through weekly Brave Voices meetings, even though she wasn't always leading. She always showed up. She sat in the back some days, letting others take the spotlight. One week, a new student named Ray read a short speech he wrote. I thought I'd be alone forever. Then someone said, you don't have to speak. Just sit with us. So I sat, and I never left. Ava clapped with the others, heart full. Outside the group, she was working on college essays. Every prompt seemed to ask the same thing. Tell us who you are. It made her pause. Was she the girl from the notebook? The author? The speaker? Or just someone who didn't want anyone else to suffer in silence? She wrote her essay 3 times before finally finding the words. I'm the kind of person who builds spaces for others to be seen, because I once needed that space and couldn't find it. So I made it. She submitted it with a deep breath. One day in October, a teacher pulled her aside after class. You've changed this school, he said, not with noise, with consistency. That's rare. Ava didn't know what to say. She nodded, then walked to her locker. On the door, a sticky note was waiting for her. It read, thank you for teaching me how to stay. There was no name, just the words. That note stayed inside her locker all year. Meanwhile, Ethan's artwork had been featured in a student exhibition downtown. One of his pieces was titled, The Quiet Doesn't Mean Nothing. It showed a figure made of torn paper, surrounded by swirling words, none of them loud, all of them powerful. Ava attended the opening night and stood beside him as others admired the piece. This is healing, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Art listens when no one else will. They took a photo together in front of the piece, both smiling, both remembering where they started. Asterisk, some stories don't need loud finales. They end with gentle ripples, a mural, a note, a glance between friends who made it through. Ava's journey was never about standing on stage. It was about making sure no one else had to stand alone. As winter approached, Ava started receiving college acceptance emails. Her first one came on a rainy afternoon. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding. She had been accepted to her top choice school with a full scholarship. Her mom burst into tears. Ava just sat in silence, staring at the screen, overwhelmed. The letter said, your leadership and voice stood out. You've already changed lives. She didn't feel like a leader. She felt like someone who had been brave once and kept going because others believed she could. At Brave Voices that week, she shared the news with the group. They clapped, hugged her, and passed around a card, signed by everyone. One note inside read, even when you leave, your voice stays with us. Spring break arrived quickly. Ava used the time to visit her future campus. She met with faculty, walked through dorm buildings, and stopped by the student center bulletin board. She saw a flyer advertising a Healing Through Writing workshop. That made her smile. The world she had helped shape was already waiting for her. On the flight home, she thought about what she would leave behind, not in sadness, but with gratitude. She wasn't just stepping away from a chapter. She was stepping into the next one with tools, stories, and strength collected from every step behind her. Back at school, preparations for graduation began. Caps, gowns, speeches. Ava was chosen as one of the student speakers. At first, she hesitated. She had spoken so many times before. This one felt different. This speech would be for her peers, the ones who knew her before the notebook, before the headlines. She spent days thinking about what to say. When the day finally came, the auditorium was full. Parents, friends, teachers, the community. Ava stepped onto the stage. She looked around, took a breath, and said, "We started here as strangers, some of us scared, some of us silent. But we leave knowing our voices matter, not because we shouted, but because we shared. Thank you for holding space for one another." The applause was long and loud, but Ava didn't cry. She smiled, walked off stage, and looked ahead. The story wasn't ending. It was just turning the page. Asterisk graduation didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like planting pieces of yourself everywhere you'd ever grown, and trusting they'd keep blooming. Ava had never wanted a spotlight, but now, walking across the stage in her cap and gown, she carried more than a diploma. She carried a legacy of quiet strength. As names were called and cheers filled the gym, Ava sat with her hands folded in her lap. Her heart beat faster with each step closer to the stage. When her name was read aloud, there was a pause. Then the crowd erupted. Not just her classmates, but teachers, parents, even the janitor who always gave her an extra smile in the hallway. She walked across the stage, accepted her diploma, and paused for a moment to take it all in. She'd survived. She'd grown. She'd given something real to the world. After the ceremony, Ava didn't go to the big graduation parties. Instead, she met with a small group of Brave Voices members at the art room. They brought cupcakes, played music, and shared letters with each other. Each person took turns reading something out loud. A note, a thank you, a dream. When it was Ava's turn, she read a poem she had written the night before. We were quiet, but not invisible. We were shaken, but not broken. We were children, and we still changed the world. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. They didn't hug goodbye. They hugged with the promise to carry it all forward. Ava packed up her locker that week. The sticky note was still there, the one that read, "Thank you for teaching me how to stay." She peeled it off carefully, folded it, and placed it in her wallet. That summer, Ava took a job with a local youth center. She didn't want to rest. Not yet. She ran writing workshops and listened to dozens of new stories from kids who had felt unheard. She noticed something. Students now came ready to speak. They were still nervous, but they didn't think they were wrong for having feelings. One girl showed Ava a tattoo she planned to get when she turned 18. It was a simple notebook with flowers blooming from the pages. She called it her Truth Garden. Ava nodded. "It suits you." August arrived, and Ava began packing for college. Janelle helped her fold clothes, and Ethan gave her a small sketchbook filled with quotes and doodles. "You'll fill it with your next chapter," he said. Ava stood in her empty room on the last night at home. The silence box sat on her shelf. She didn't take it with her. Instead, she left it on the desk for the next voice ready to rise. Asterisk. The college campus buzzed with energy. New faces, new halls, unfamiliar rooms. But Ava wasn't nervous. She had already faced fear and made it her friend. This wasn't a restart. It was a continuation. A new place for truth to find its next. Voice. Ava arrived at her dorm, carrying 2 suitcases and a box of books. Her roommate, a girl named Lena, greeted her with a warm smile. They clicked instantly. Lena had heard of Brave Voices. She had even used a silence box at her old high school. "That was you?" she asked. Wide-eyed. Ava laughed softly. "It was all of us, really." Classes started that week. Ava enrolled in psychology, creative writing, and a course on community. Leadership. Each class opened a door in her mind. She began to understand not just what had happened to her, but how systems worked, how trauma, silence, and power connected. In her writing class, the professor asked students to submit a personal story for their final project. Ava hesitated at first. She had already told her story, hadn't she? But one night, sitting under a campus tree, she realized this wasn't about repeating the past. It was about reflecting on it with new eyes. She wrote a piece titled, "The Room Where Silence Broke." It wasn't dramatic. It was clear, honest. Patient. Her professor pulled her aside after class. "This isn't just good writing," she said. "It's a roadmap. Others could find themselves in your words." That same week, Ava attended a student group fair. Booths were everywhere. Sports, debate, arts. Then she saw a small table with a handmade sign. "Brave Voices, coming soon." She blinked. A freshman named Jordan was sitting there, passing out flyers. Ava walked over. "Are you starting this?" Jordan nodded nervously. "I read about it last year. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I was hoping someone would join me." Ava smiled. "You just did." They sat down together and started planning. Brave Voices didn't need a founder. To keep going, it needed believers. And that's exactly what Ava found in dorm rooms, lecture halls, and library corners. New students who had stories, new hearts ready to listen. The silence was no longer a wall. It was a doorway. Within a month, the Campus Brave Voices group had over 20 members. Jordan and Ava co-led the meetings, but they made sure everyone had a chance to contribute. The format was familiar. Check-ins, shared writing, open space for anyone who wanted to speak. One evening, a student named May read a letter she had written to her younger self. "You're not too sensitive. You're just aware. That's your strength." The room was quiet after she finished. Then someone whispered, "Thank you." Another student stood up and shared a song they'd written. No one judged. No one rushed. They let the room breathe. Of the group spread across campus. Soon, students from other universities reached out to Ava online. "Can you help us start one here? Do you have a guide? Would you be open to speaking at our orientation?" Ava realized she needed to update the Brave Spaces starter guide. She added a new section for college students. She included tips for managing busy schedules, respecting emotional boundaries, and encouraging diversity of voices. She also added a chapter titled, "When You're Not the Loudest." One in the room. It started with a single sentence. "You don't have to lead loudly to lead powerfully." Meanwhile, her creative writing professor recommended her for a student storytelling fellowship. It included travel, mentorship, and a small stipend. Ava accepted. She spent weekends visiting other colleges and high schools, offering workshops on healing through story. She didn't lecture. She listened. She brought writing prompts, simple exercises, and examples of student art. Wherever she went, students opened up. One boy in Indiana said, "I didn't know words could feel like a home." Ava smiled. They can, especially when someone hands you the key. Every time she returned to campus, the Brave Voices room had something new on the wall. Poems, sketches, quotes. Someone had pinned up a sign that read, "This space was built by listeners." Ava traced the letters with her fingers. She didn't feel like a leader. She felt like a gardener, and the flowers were blooming on their own. Asterisk. Brave Voices didn't need a founder to keep going. It needed believers. And that's exactly what Ava found in dorm rooms, lecture halls, and library corners. New students who had stories. New hearts ready to listen. The silence was no longer a wall. It was a doorway. Within a month, the Campus Brave Voices group had over 20 members. Jordan and Ava co-led the meetings, but they made sure everyone had a chance to contribute. The format was familiar. Check-ins, shared writing, open space for anyone who wanted to speak. One evening, a student named May read a letter she had written to her younger self. "You're not too sensitive. You're just aware. That's your strength." The room was quiet after she finished. Then someone whispered, "Thank you." Another student stood up and shared a song they'd written. No one judged. No one rushed. They let the room breathe. Of the group spread across campus. Soon, students from other universities reached out to Ava online. "Can you help us start one here? Do you have a guide? Would you be open to speaking at our orientation?" Ava realized she needed to update the Brave Spaces starter guide. She added a new section for college students. She included tips for managing busy schedules, respecting emotional boundaries, and encouraging diversity of voices. She also added a chapter titled, "When You're Not the Loudest." One in the room. It started with a single sentence. "You don't have to lead loudly to lead powerfully." Meanwhile, her creative writing professor recommended her for a student storytelling fellowship. It included travel, mentorship, and a small stipend. Ava accepted. She spent weekends visiting other colleges and high schools, offering workshops on healing through story. She didn't lecture. She listened. She brought writing prompts, simple exercises, and examples of student art. Wherever she went, students opened up. One boy in Indiana said, "I didn't know words could feel like a home." Ava smiled. They can, especially when someone hands you the key. Every time she returned to campus, the Brave Voices room had something new on the wall. Poems, sketches, quotes. Someone had pinned up a sign that read, "This space was built by listeners." Ava traced the letters with her fingers. She didn't feel like a leader. She felt like a gardener, and the flowers were blooming on their own. Asterisk. Sometimes legacies aren't written in books or medals. They live in rooms you never enter, in conversations you never hear, in courage passed from one person to the next. Ava didn't watch over Brave Voices anymore. She let it fly. By spring semester, Ava's schedule was packed. Classes, fellowship trips, writing, and helping students across the country start their own healing circles. She didn't attend every Brave Voices meeting on campus anymore. Jordan had grown into a steady leader, and new members stepped up to help. But Ava always checked in, sometimes by message, sometimes by quietly sitting in the back and listening. One day, she received a message from a student in Alaska. They had used her starter guide to begin their own group and wanted to share a few photos. In the pictures were a circle of students, a whiteboard filled with affirmations, and a shelf labeled Truth Library. Ava replied with just 2 words, "Keep going." She often said that now. Not speeches, not advice, just encouragement, because she understood everyone's story was different, but the need to be heard was the same. Later that month, Ava got a surprising call that her old school's new principal wanted to invite her back for a special event. They were dedicating a new room, a safe space for students to reflect, write, and speak without judgment. They called it the Ava Monroe Room for Brave Voices. Ava didn't know what to say at first. She had never wanted her name on anything. But after thinking it through, she agreed on one condition. The space must be for the students. Always. Let them shape it. The principal smiled. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say." She returned home quietly, slipping into town without fanfare. The room unveiling was simple. No cameras, no speeches, just students, teachers, and a wall filled with words. Some were Ava's, most weren't. She stood in the back and watched a younger student place a notebook on a shelf. It looked exactly like the one Ava had once held, shaking in court. Now, it sat calmly on a shelf, waiting for someone else to find their voice. A teacher noticed Ava and walked over. "This wouldn't have happened without you," he said. Ava shook her head. "It happened because someone listened." As she left the room, she felt something settle in her chest. Not pride, not relief, not peace. Her name was on the wall now, but Ava didn't need that. What mattered was that students walked into the room and felt safe. Not because someone told them it was safe, but because they had space to be real, to be heard. That was her true legacy. After the dedication, Ava stayed in her hometown for 2 days. She visited her old classroom, sat on the same bench near the gym, and walked past the spot where she had first handed Mrs. Davis that notebook. She didn't cry, but she did smile. Everything had changed. And yet, some things like the need to listen, to trust, to tell the truth, remained the same. Back at college, Ava felt more focused than ever. She began drafting her first full book. It wasn't a memoir. Not exactly. It was a collection of essays and stories from youth across the country. She titled it Quiet Seeds, Stories That Grew in Silence. Each chapter began with a reflection and ended with a real student's voice, someone who had found strength in vulnerability. She reached out to former Brave Voices members, students she'd met on trips, and even some who had only written to her online. Every one of them gave permission to share their truth. One boy wrote, "I never thought anyone would care about my story, but Ava did. And that made me care too." As she compiled the book, Ava realized she didn't want to publish it through a big company. She chose an independent press that allowed her to keep full creative control. The book came out quietly. No big tour, no interviews, no flashy promotion. But it spread fast. Teachers began assigning chapters in classrooms. Counselors kept copies in their offices. Parents read it with their kids. And students wrote too. Ava saying, "This feels like someone finally saw me." She replied to as many as she could. She never sent long messages, usually just, "I see you too." During finals week, Ava received a call from a national education nonprofit. They were awarding her with a Youth Advocate Medal, a rare recognition for students who had changed educational culture. The ceremony was in New York. Her mom came with her. As Ava stood on stage, accepting the medal, she looked out at the crowd and said, "I didn't start Brave Voices because I was brave. I started it because I was tired of being afraid. And I've learned that when you speak with honesty, someone always hears you. Even if it's just one person, it's enough to begin." Asterisk, asterisk. Not every hero wears a cape. Some just carry notebooks. Ava didn't save the world in a single moment. She helped others save themselves, one truth at a time. And that was enough. After the award ceremony, Ava returned to campus feeling a little different. Not because of the medal, but because she realized something. The work she started didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to everyone who carried it forward. Jordan was now mentoring new members at Brave Voices. The meetings ran themselves. Lena had organized a mental health resource fair with students from different departments. Even students Ava hadn't met yet were quoting her guidebook in campus forums. She started taking longer walks alone, not because she was sad, but because she was reflecting. The silence no longer scared her. It felt like an old friend. One evening, she visited the campus art gallery. A new piece hung near the entrance. It showed a spiral of notebooks, each one opening into a flower. The title read, "She Listened First." A small label underneath said it was dedicated to Ava Monroe. She stood there for a long time, her arms crossed gently, her face calm. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Finals passed. Graduation approached again. This time hers. As students packed, planned, and said their goodbyes, Ava received an invitation. It was from a publisher. They wanted her to help design a nationwide curriculum around storytelling. and emotional safety in schools. She wouldn't just write books now. She'd help shape how schools taught students to speak and listen. She said yes, the summer after graduation. Ava moved into a small apartment near her new office. She decorated it with art from students, stacks of journals, and one small shelf for books that had changed her. On the top sat her own quiet seeds. She still answered emails from students. She still opened letters, but she didn't need to do everything anymore. She trusted the next generation of truth-tellers. Because they weren't waiting to be saved. They were already speaking. Asterisk movements don't end. They evolve. They pass from one voice to the next, like wind through trees. Never owned, only carried. Ava never asked to be known. But now, because of her, countless students knew one thing for certain. Silence is never the end of the story. Years later, a student walked into a quiet classroom in a town Ava had never visited. On the wall hung a poster. Speak, even if your voice shakes. On a shelf sat a silence box, slightly worn, but still standing. The student dropped a note inside, then sat down and joined the circle of others who waited in calm understanding. No. One said Ava's name that day. They didn't have to. Her impact lived in the room, in the brave stillness, in the way each student leaned in when someone spoke. At a conference years later, Ava met a young woman named Riley. She was leading a workshop on student-led healing circles. When Ava introduced herself, Riley lit up. "You're the reason I started," she said. "Your book was in our school library. I read it cover to cover in one night." Ava smiled softly. She no longer needed to explain what Brave Voices was. People already knew. She stayed for Riley's session, watched her lead the room, saw her ask thoughtful questions, noticed how she gave others space. Afterward, Ava hugged her and whispered, "You're doing beautifully." Riley replied, "You taught me that we don't need permission to care deeply." That night, Ava walked to her hotel room and opened her journal. She wrote one line. "The seeds were never mine. I just planted the first one." The journal was full now, hundreds of pages. Not just her story, but stories collected, witnessed, respected. She looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, someone else was writing. Someone else was finding the strength to speak. And Ava? She was still listening. Always.